Hello everyone, my name is Matthew Day. I'm a forecaster here in the Norman, Oklahoma forecast office. Today we're going to talk about warm season precipitation types. The precip type step will run after the base forecast grid elements are completed and the integrity step has run. The purpose of this step is to create the individual weather component grids that will be used to create the final weather grid. This step will use the base grids you created and finalized earlier, such as POP and QPF, and in the wintertime, temperature and dew point, to help control the initialization of weather types. So it is important that your base grids are complete and finalized before continuing with this step. During the warm season, you'll mainly use this step to control thunder, severe mention, and drizzle, since your dominant precipitation type will always be liquid rain. This step will become even more important during winter weather when you use it to control the type of precipitation forecast, especially since NBM may not always forecast the correct weather types. More on this in the winter module. The grids that this step will create are a numeric version of the final weather grid. These grids are called weather types. Whether R is for rain, whether ZR is freezing rain, whether IP is sleet, whether S is snow, whether L is drizzle, and whether ZL is freezing drizzle. So a value of 20 in the weather rain grid will mean the weather grid will say a slight chance of rain or a slight chance of showers. A value of 65 on the weather sleet would yield a weather grid that says sleet likely. Just like the other weather type grids, pot thunder controls the wording for thunder chances. A value of 40 in pot thunder means you will get your weather type with a chance of thunderstorms tacked onto it. Pot severe is not like the weather type grids. Values greater than or equal to 30 will give the thunder the plus intensity or will show up as severe in NDFD grids. Since your final weather grid is created from all of these grids, your POP at each time will have the same value in at least one of the corresponding weather type grids. Drizzle weather types are special because drizzle can be both a measurable precipitation type and non-measurable precipitation type. They don't have to match your POP, but at least one weather grid during that time period should. Let's look at the precip types GUI next. The overall process is going to be select your initialization options, then click the yellow Init Weather Types button. Look over your initialized grids and make any necessary edits. Note the edit tools available to assist. Check consistency and fix any consistency issues. Check the weather preview if desired. Finally, save and continue. On the right, you can expand, collapse each section of this step, and there are handy help icons that you can hover over to see useful tips. Most of the time in the warm season, all you'll need are steps 1 and 5. Let's go through each of these steps in a bit more detail. Forecast Builder gives you a number of initialization options to help you get as close as you can to your desired forecast right from the start. On the left, you can select what weather types you want to include in the initialization. Usually defaults will suffice, but if you want to add severe wording or drizzle, you can check those boxes here. On the right, you can select what method you'd like to use for calculating thunder. POP will just copy your POP grids, and NBM will use the NBM thunder grids. Also on the right, you can limit the initialization to the selected edit area and or time range. This can be useful if you want to use different settings for a particular time area or time range. For example, if you want to add drizzle just to your northwest counties on day 2, or if you want to use the NBM thunder on some days and POP thunder on the rest of the days. The best way to do this is to init with your dominant settings over everything first, then re-init over your selected time range or edit areas with your alternative settings next. Once your settings are selected, just click the Init Weather Types button to run the initialization. If you want to start with a blank slate, you can click Delete Weather Types to delete the selected weather type elements. Bottom line, almost all warm season use will be clicking Init Weather Types and then Save Continue. Some of the weather types will produce additional dialog boxes when you init to give you more control over where these weather types are produced. For example, drizzle can be controlled by a QPF threshold or by visibility and dew point depression, or as a straight replacement of rain. Sometimes, especially in drier climates, or when dealing with diurnally driven convection, you may want to mention weather for pops below 15%. For this, you can use the POUT limiter grid. This will give you control over the minimum pop required for a weather mention. To use this feature, start by creating a scratch grid for the POUT limiter element over the time range that you wish this lower pop to threshold to affect. Then assign the new threshold to the grid. Note that you can limit this to a specific edit area if you wish. Only values between 10 and 15% are valid. Anything else will be ignored, leaving you with the default 15% for those grid points. Finally, hit the Init Weather Types button to make sure that your weather type grids include the sub 15% values. Tip: if you're going to use the POUT limiter feature, it is recommended that you set up these grids before you do your initializations. The next step is to edit your weather type grids. Forecast Builder includes a few tools to help you with this process. For example, you can use the Copy Pop to Selection button to apply pop-derived thunder to individual grids. You can also copy values between different weather type grids. Use the drop-down menu to select your destination grid. The selected grid in Edit area will be your source grid. There are two modes. Replace will overwrite any values in the destination grid. Max will only copy over values that are lower than the source grid, effectively giving you the maximum of the source and destination grids. All of these built-in tools apply only to the selected area and time range. Consistency between your weather type and your pop is a critical component at this stage. Pop and the weather type grids need to match at every time range, but forecasters could inadvertently create a mismatch between the two. For instance, if you had a pop of 30% but a weather type grid of 60%, your grids would be inconsistent. A consistency check is utilized to make sure everything matches. The check can be run at any time with a button push in the GUI, but it will also automatically run when advancing to the next step to ensure that when the weather grid is created later, these weather types will match the pop. Weather types also need to match other forecast variables like temperature and/or snow level. More on winter weather consistency is available in the winter weather module. When consistency issues are found, there are fix tools that can be run to easily clear the inconsistencies. Warm season consistency issues are rare. If one occurs, it usually means you forgot to click the Init Weather Types and create your new weather type grids that match your pops. Warm season consistency issues will concern pop and weather type mismatches. Again, we'll cover temperature and weather type mismatches in the winter module. Let's create a consistency issue on purpose to go through the process. Suppose you have a pop grid with values of 20% and a weather rain grid with that same 20%, but a part on the southeast side that sets at 0. You have your pop that says we should say a slight chance of precipitation in this area. Meanwhile, your weather rain grid says we should have no weather mentioned there. From Forecast Builder's perspective, you created both the pop grid and the weather type grid, but they don't match. So it doesn't know which forecast you want more. Is what you put in your pop grids correct? Or did you change your mind and put something different in your weather type grid? Either way, the buttons you push depend on what you want to keep. When an inconsistency issue arises, you'll see a red message in the status window that tells you what the problem is. Forecast Builder will give you two options, highlighted in red, that you'll decide between for fixing the consistency issues. The Fix Pop Keep Weather Type button will force the pop to match the weather rain grid. In other words, it will change your pop for you to match your weather rain grid. The other option is the Fix Weather Type Keep Pop button, which will force the weather rain grid to match your pop. In some situations, this will just automatically clip your weather type grid with no other interaction needed from you. Other times, when their weather type grid needs to be created, you'll have to provide Forecast Builder a little more information. Forecast Builder doesn't know what weather type you want to put this fix into, so instead it'll create a temporary grid called Copy Me To Weather Type. You'll highlight this grid and use the Copy tool in the Edit section using Max for mode and copy these values over to weather rain or weather drizzle. Fixing can also be restricted to selected time ranges or edit areas if desired. Once you've done all your edits and fixed any consistency issues, you may wonder what the final product is going to look like. Weather Preview can give you a simplified heads up on how your various weather types will combine. There's two advantages here. One, you don't have to wait until the weather step to see the end result. And two, the simplified grids can be easier to interpret than the mess that your final weather grids will sometimes show. Once you're satisfied with the results, click Run to continue. Consistency will auto-run, alerting you to any outstanding issues. Then if all your temperatures are above 40 degrees Fahrenheit, typical for warm season, the P-type accum step will auto-run. That's all I have for this module. If you have any questions, you can send an email to the email address here in ws.forecastbuilder@noaa.gov. Thanks for listening.